So welcome everyone to our Mindfulness Wales Zoom session. And today we're looking at how we can take mindfulness to disadvantaged groups in society. I've done that sort of work myself, and others have as well. Other people here have as well, but we have two very experienced people who've been working in this field. So we have Dr. Ceryl Davies, who is teaching at Bangor. She's a lecturer in social work, but she's going to be telling us about her project, her work, taking mindfulness to people with learning disabilities, learning difficulties. And Richard Edwards is with us as well. And you'll see them at the top of the screen, I think. And Richard is the director of Huggard, if that's how you pronounce it. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. And he's recently become, so Richard's been doing that for many years, and I'll say a little bit more about him after we've done a meditation. And Richard has just recently become the director of the Mindfulness Initiative. So he's going to be speaking about the work that he has been doing over the last few years and is continuing to do alongside the work with the Mindfulness Initiative on a smaller scale. So first things first, we're going to have a meditation that Gwenan is going to lead, and she'll lead it bilingually. So over to you, Gwenan. I'll spotlight you.
Thank you, Croeso. So just taking some time to just settle, just to arrive, felly cymryd amser I gyrraedd, I sylwi sut beth ydi o I fod yn y lle yma, just to notice how it is to come to this situation that we're in, this gathering. Might have been before, so it's a great welcome and allowing yourself to welcome yourself as well. Felly, cymryd anadl neu ddwy, taking a breath or two. Yes, di sylwi ar sut beth ydi o eistedd. Noticing how it is to just simply sit. Leaving the feet on the floor. Dim o'r traed ar y llawr. It's the weight of the body. Seres yn eistedd. Hyd y cefn, so the length of the spine. Rach yn deimlo y dwylo ac y ffyrddiad y dwylo. Maybe just noticing the sensation of the hands. Ymdeimlo llif yr anadl. Just noticing the breath. Giving ourselves a moment to anchor ourselves. Cyfle I ni'n hunain cael angori. Maybe the mind is still busy, easily distracted. Just bringing ourselves to an anchor point that might be supportive. Gadael I ni'n hunain fod yn cael angori. Beth bynnag mae'r meddwl yn neud, whatever the mind is doing, just gently bringing it back. With a sense of kindness. And just checking in simply on ourselves. Cymryd amser I sylwi ar sut ydyn ni ar hyn o bryd. Every space in gefnogol. Choosing what seems to be supportive. Bringing our attention back into an anchor point allowing ourselves to simply come into this moment. Notice any distractions. Gadael I ni'n hunain hyrach. Sylwi ar be bynnag sydd yn denu'r meddwl. Dyna gyda'r sylw nôl. Always bringing the attention back. And just expanding the attention now to include the whole of the body sitting. You might have chosen to stand. Ymestyn y sylw. Yn deimlo'r corff I gyd yn eistedd, yn sefyll os yna gyda chi dewis yna. Yn eich amser eich hun, gadael i'r llygyd agor sydd yn wedi bod yn hau. And then in your own time, allowing the eyes to open if they have been closed. And coming into position of being aware of listening. The joy of being together in this situation. And if it feels supportive, putting your cameras on, that feels okay for you. And over back to Bishop Pliny. Who's disappeared? I think he probably expected me to go on. Oh, there he is.
I'm just trying to spotlight myself. Spotlight for everyone. And I'm going to spotlight Richard as well. Okay. So, yeah, I'm really pleased to be introducing Richard. Actually, I'll just say something about the running order. First of all, Richard's going to tell us about his work. Then we'll have a little pause, and then Gwen will introduce Carol, who will tell us about her work, and then we'll have time for discussion in the group. I think given the numbers today, it should work to have discussion without going into breakout rooms. So I first met Richard getting on for 4 years ago now. He came on a mindfulness course, an MBCT course I was teaching in Cardiff in person. And then halfway through the course, COVID-19 struck, and the rest of it was online. Anyway, Richard, if you're a mindfulness teacher, and I'm sure quite a lot of you on the call are, then you have lots of people coming along, and you can't, after a while, remember everyone who's been on all your courses and all that. But there are some people who stand out, and you think, oh no, I must keep in touch with this person. So I was very intrigued by Richard as a participant. And we got to know each other. And I got to know a little bit about his work at the Huggard. Went to visit the Huggard, which is a homelessness centre in Cardiff. And I'm sure he will be telling us about what it does and the group people it works with. But they're essentially the people with the highest needs in society, could say. They're the people in the street. And it's a very, very impressive centre that's been very well established and highly respected. And I could see it that Richard had been had taken it to that position over the years. So Richard's become more and more a mindfulness person, I think, and less of a, whatever he was before. And to the extent of just having become the director of the mindfulness initiative. So I think that definitely makes you a mindfulness person, Richard. But he's also trained in breathworks. And, that then we have the overlap between those two worlds, the world of learning a particular, becoming a mindfulness teacher, and then social work, let's call it that, working with the most difficult situations, people with greatest needs. And how do you take mindfulness? How do you bring those two together? So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Richard has to say. I'm going to unspotlight myself and hand over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Vishwapani. That was quite an introduction. I'm not sure I'm going to live up to that, but there we are. Yes, as Vishwapani says, I've been on a journey. I've been running a homelessness organisation for the last 15 years, and it's only in the last couple of months I've transitioning over to work for the Mindfulness Initiative. But it's working with people with complex lives and looking at how mindfulness can become accessible to people in society who perhaps need it the most is something that I'm passionate about. And from a Mindfulness Initiative point of view, that's a top-down policy agenda, but also it's got to meet something. It's got to mean something when it hits the ground. It's got to create a landscape where people who are actually rolling their sleeves up and getting their hands dirty can actually find a landscape for mindfulness that actually is fertile to working with the client group that they're working with. So anyway, I've got a presentation, so I'm going to dive into that. Can we see that okay?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Huggard, as I said, I'm currently still a management consultant for Huggard on 1 day a week whilst they're recruiting a new chief executive. But even after that period of time, I intend to go back and step away from any management responsibility there and focus on therapeutic mindfulness interventions with clients there. So what is Huggard? As Vishwapani says, it's a homelessness organisation, but I'll sort of unpack that a little bit as I go along, because I think homelessness in some ways is a misnomer in terms of the type of work and the client group that we work with, and I'll explain that as we go forward. So the services we run 2 hostels on site, emergency accommodation and an open access intervention centre, and it's open 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So it's an organisation that never sleeps. At the moment, we're providing around 122 units of high complex needs accommodation, and all the residents have 24/7 access to intensive housing and independent living support, access to specialist substance misuse support, access to development, therapeutic and diversionary activities 7 days a week. And central to our service, because we're not just providing accommodation, because whilst that's necessary, it's not necessarily the primary problem that people have when they come to us, is that we offer a full range of open access support to people who are sleeping rough within the city, who perhaps either don't have the opportunity to engage with accommodation, or they don't feel ready to engage with accommodation for a plethora of reasons. So we do everything we can, working with as many partners as we can, to provide a reflective, person-centered, strength-based, compassionate and caring approach to tackle personal experiences of homelessness, providing psychological safety to improve people's well-being. And I think it's really important that we are very clear that we work with people where they are, not where we think they should be, and to meet those challenges with focus, clarity, creativity and compassion. And I think that's really, really important in terms of opening up services, is recognizing that people are where they are. And lots of services put thresholds up in terms of, if you access our service, you have to be sober. If you access our service, you have to come at this particular time. And actually, some people aren't in that place at that particular time. And to be able to welcome people into a service where they are at that particular moment in their lives is really, really fundamental. So on a weekly basis, we see about 400 visits to the centre. We're working each day with about 20 people that are sleeping rough within the city. and we provide a full range of service. We provide the busiest needle exchange service in Wales. So our harm reduction service, which works around minimising the harm that people are causing to themselves and other people around their substance misuse. Oh, somebody's got their mic on. If you can make sure you're muted, that'd be brilliant. Thank you. And we provide a full range of support in terms of independent living support, behavioural therapy. We have GPs, nurses, bloodborne virus clinics, chiropodies. We provide mindfulness, obviously. I'm going to talk about that more. Yoga, a whole range of activities that you see on the screen, and I'm not going to spend my time reading them out. But we try and take a holistic approach to meeting people where they are and identifying what their needs are and designing the services around the individual needs of the people that we work with. Now, I started by saying that calling ourselves a homelessness organisation is a misnomer in lots of ways, because for most of the people that we work with, homelessness is a tertiary issue. And often their primary and secondary issues, and not necessarily in this order, are mental health issues and maladjusted coping strategies such as offending behaviours, engagement with the criminal justice system, substance misuse. So they're often the primary and secondary issues that people are struggling with on a daily basis. And actually, the reason why they're homeless is often because they can't sustain a roof over their head rather than that they don't have a roof over their head. So in terms of looking at, and these figures I've got here, are from a study that we did across, I think it was 7 major cities across the UK a number of years ago now. But the figures, whilst they have changed and some of them have got worse, gives you some idea of the complexity of the lives of the people that we work with. And so we've got in Cardiff, at that time, we had 90% of people we were working with had slept rough. 35% had grown up in the care system. 60% had spent time in prison or a young offenders institute. 47% had been admitted to hospital with a mental health issue. And I don't know about the last time you tried to get yourself sectioned under the Mental Health Act, but believe you me, it's not easy to do. So having nearly half of our clients at some time being admitted to hospital with a mental health issue is a really, really significant statistic. We've got 53% on this that use hard drug. That's probably nearer 70% at this point. 78% have had 6 or more alcoholic drinks on a daily basis. And that was the question that was designed into this to test for problem drinking. And without saying
homeless people.
We've got 62% of people involved in street drinking, over half involved in survival shoplifting. A fifth of our clients have been in the armed forces. Nearly half have been the victim of violent crime or domestic violence. 60% have been divorced or separated. 16% have found themselves homeless after the death of a long-term partner. And a third have been made redundant. And where you see the asterisk next to the number, out of the 7 cities that they looked at in this study, which included Birmingham, Glasgow, Westminster, Dublin, Cardiff, I forget the others, where you see the asterisk, and that's where Cardiff unfortunately scored the highest figure on a national basis. So you don't have to be much of a mathematician to add those percentages together to realise that they come to much more than 100%. So the people that we're working with don't have one of these experiences. Often they're living with many of these experiences, many of these traumas. And so when you look at that in terms of a Venn diagram, you know, if your screen is small, it might look like, you know, there's a very big area in the middle of that Venn diagram where people have experienced all of them. And if you come closer, you'll see it is a very big area in the middle of that Venn diagram where people have experienced all of them. Nearly half of our clients have experienced homelessness. They've experienced institutional care. So that's long-term hospital admission, time growing up in the care system, spending time in prison or young offenders institute. What that figures don't include is the armed forces. Now, as part of the study group here, I argued that being in the armed forces for a number of years was a form of institutional care. And I was shot down on that because, excuse the pun, but I was shot down on that on the basis that it wasn't politically okay to suggest that being in the armed forces was a form of institutional care, because there were people who had very positive experiences of being in the armed forces. To which my response was, I know people that have had very positive experiences of having to spend time in hospital as well. But anyway, those figures weren't included there. 70% substance misuse issues, 67% street culture activities. So that's things like street-based sex work, survival shoplifting, street drinking. So nearly half of the people that we work with have experienced all of those compound traumas in their lives. So this just gives you, I've just come to the end of that presentation now before I start talking about the work and why I've brought mindfulness into this, really. You'll see the picture on the top right there is the dedicated mindfulness room that we've set up within the centre. So that we've got that quiet, reflective place where people can go, not just to practice mindfulness. We have people who go there to pray. We have people to go there just to have some quiet time. But it is important for us to have that reflective space that we call the mindfulness room within the centre. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. There we are. You got me back now. So I came to mindfulness through my own personal problems, I suppose. I worked in, surprisingly enough, a very stressful job. I also have a degenerative spine disease, so I was managing mental health, physical health, and the combination of those two. So I came to mindfulness, and it worked for me as a self-help thing through reading books for a number of years. And then I reached a plateau and decided I needed to go on an 8-week course into Vishvapani stage left. And I got so much out of that by actually being on a course and actually picking up the energy and the awareness that it gave me, particularly around concepts like compassionate acceptance and the difference between resignation and compassionate acceptance, where I had become resigned to my chronic pain. I'd become resigned to the difficulties that I was facing. And I had mistaken that resignation for a form of compassionate acceptance. And that realization, and that in some ways quite a subtle difference of thinking that I was no longer resisting the pain that I had, no longer resisting the struggles that I was facing. I thought that not resisting was a form of acceptance, but actually it wasn't. It was just resignation. And that very subtle difference was a real eye-opener to me. And that made me decide to look deeper into mindfulness. And if I could get that with one area of mindfulness, perhaps I could get it with others. And then I became aware that it wasn't just me that was experiencing primary and secondary traumas, primary and secondary suffering, if you like. Huggard employs around 60 people. And we work with people in a low threshold environment who have very, very complex lives. And there's no way that you can work in that environment without taking on secondary trauma as part of that. And so for me, it was about actually, this is something that we can bring to the staff team. So we started sitting down with staff, talking to staff about mindfulness, about setting up a mindfulness group in the morning, which we did. I had members of staff coming to me and say, can I come and see you individually and talk about this? So we did one-to-one coaching sessions around mindfulness. and so had several staff picking that up. But what was always nagging at the back of my mind is that the people that needed mindfulness the most were the people that were coming through the doors with these very complex and compound traumas. But I'd gone through a mindfulness program that was based on an 8-week course that was sequential. And here I was working with people who didn't know what day of the week it was. And if you said to them, come back later at 11 o'clock, you could guarantee 95% you'd never see them again, or you wouldn't see them till Thursday when they come back in and said, you said to come back. And I said, yeah, I told you to come back an hour and a half ago, hour and a half, 3 days ago. So working with people with such a level of complexity in their lives that looking at a structured mindfulness program wasn't viable. So I started informal mindfulness sessions of just, coffee, biscuit, sitting people around, taking a bit of a gamble in terms of talking to people who'd spent time in prison, were probably under the influence of substances, talking to them about mindfulness and what it could mean. And really interesting to see some of the feedback got back in terms of some of the barriers to that, but also some of the openness to that, and actually looking at what arrived in the room. And what it became aware to me that as if mindfulness was going to work, it had to be very, very agile. It had to be very sensitive. It had to be very trauma informed, because you had to work with people where they were when they came in the room. So the programs that I started to do and the sessions that I started to do were very much based around what arrived in the room that day. And sometimes it'd be people who'd been 5 or 6 times. Sometimes it'd be somebody who came new. Sometimes it'd be somebody who came new with a real hostile challenge, sort of, I'm coming here to see what this is all about because I think it's a load of old nonsense, and actually trying to disrupt it. So taking that on board and looking at developing different areas of that was something that I was really keen to do. I think it's been successful. There have been things that clients stop me and say, can we do this next week? Can we do a finger breathing exercise? Can we do a body scan? Can we do a breathing anchor meditation? And even to the point, and this is amazing, is actually turning towards difficult situations. Now, when somebody's had very, very complex lives, perhaps they were raped as a child by their parents, perhaps they spent time in prison, perhaps they've had all sorts of really traumatic experiences that actually they don't want to turn towards. Looking at turning towards complex situations, difficult situations with clients is really hard. So learning to adapt the language, learning to pick how you're doing that in terms of saying, dealing with stuff that's manageable, that's palatable, that's understandable, taking very small steps so people could say, oh yeah, actually, I had an argument with somebody half an hour ago. Yeah, that's okay. I can actually turn towards that and think about that. And actually I can learn to think about how I could have responded to that rather than reacting to that. And having those discussions around short practices has been really beneficial. So this is an area of work I want to develop. There's lots of studies around the effects of mindfulness in terms of working with people with PTSD and opiate addictions and how it can help reduce those. But there's very little work going on with people with really, really complex lives, and looking at how you can build a modular approach, a sort of agile approach that people can dip in and out of it, but still get something not superficial, but something that's based on a level that's using language and life experiences that they can identify with, rather than the classic 8-week model, but actually looking at the themes and the concepts within that, and actually finding a way to approach that, using things like snow globes and all sorts of little tricks that you can keep up your sleeve, and just building a base of that to say, this is how we can actually make it accessible. This is how we can make this work better. So that's it, really. I haven't got any answers at this stage. It's very much a work in progress, but it's a work that I'm really excited about, work that I'm really passionate about, and work I think that can make a real difference to people's lives and the lives of people that really need this to make a difference to them.
Wow. That was really interesting, Richard. Thank you so much. I won't say any more now because we're going to hear from Carol, and Gwenan is going to be introducing her. So I'm going to swap around the spotlights, and if you have any questions for Richard, and I've got a few of my own, but there will be an opportunity for discussion in the second half of the session this evening. Fiddling around with spotlights. Sorry, Carol, I've lost you on my screen. Could you just raise your hand using the, oh, there you are, yeah. Good.
Right, well, croeso, and it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Ceryl. Unlike Vishwapani, who knew exactly when he met Richard, I have no idea when I first met Ceryl. I think it was when she worked as a manager for youth offending services, when we were offering, I used to be a speech and language therapist in North Wales, and I think we were starting to set up a service, but have come together again because my clinical background was in learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities. So we've kind of reconvened about in terms of her work, which I'm really excited about. To people who may not be kind of know about the services for intellectual disabilities, but they're often the kind of, they're known as the Cinderella services, and they're often neglected, and especially with kind of different ways of working. So it's really important to be able to offer different ways of working, and Ceryl is very much doing that. Felly croeso Ceryl, ac roedd y drosodd I chdi. So over to you.
Great, diolch. Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk to you this evening about my work. As Gwenan was introducing now, a lot of my work, indeed my passion, has been working to support young people and adults with learning disabilities. And before I came to work in the university on a full-time contract, I worked for many years as a senior manager for learning disability services, and also doing research in the university. And one of my passions was around building services for adults with a learning disability that were focused on well-being and developing well-being focused community services. I worked as a senior manager in Gwynedd, which is a local authority area in North Wales, and worked in that role for 6 years. And during that period, we managed to get grants from the Welsh Assembly government at the time, the Welsh government now, to build a wellbeing team with a cohort of 8 staff members at the time. And one of my passions was around kind of building different wellbeing pathways as part of that service, mindfulness being a key part of that service. So I was absolutely really excited when North Wales Together, which is a transformation project, the only transformation project for learning disabilities across Wales, contacted me when I was working in the university and asked if I would like to lead on the project building mindfulness-based services and building mindfulness-based tools for adults with a learning disability across North Wales. So of course I said, when do you want me to start the project? Because I loved my time working as a senior manager in learning disabilities. And just to give you a sense of how much I loved it, I went to cover a post for 6 weeks during restructuring and stayed to do the post for nearly 7 years. So absolutely loved it. My passion is to support adults with a learning disability, and across kind of my career of working in social work for nearly 25 years, you know, I have to say it's probably my favourite service area. So I've got lots of passion for this area, and I'm really looking forward to kind of describing a bit about my project with you now. So I have got some slides, which I'm hoping will share okay now, and there'll be no technical difficulties. So fingers and toes crossed, everyone. I'll be able to see the slides in a moment. This is always the test, isn't it? Are they there or not? Oh, bear with me. Hopefully they'll come up now. Okay, I'll just give it a whirl again. Sorry, everyone. They were there before, now they've slightly disappeared. So I'll have a second go of sharing my slides. Here they are. Brill. So hopefully they'll share now. Can everyone see the slides okay? Are they there okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Brill, great. Oh, I've written the slides bilingually, so I'll take you through the presentation. So I'm presenting this project, which is a partnership between Bangor University, and I'm leading the project on behalf of Bangor and North Wales Together, which is the transformation project across North Wales for adults with learning disabilities. So what I hope to achieve this evening is just to give you a flavour and a sense of this project, and to discuss the context of working to support adults with a learning disability through mindfulness, and through kind of a flexible, person-centred and a relationship-based approach. And for me, kind of just leading on the previous presentation and the synergy with what was previously discussed, that flexibility is indeed extremely important. Raising awareness on the application and indeed the uses and limitations of mindfulness to support adults with learning disabilities, and to discuss the aims and objectives, and for me also the so what of the project. So I'm going to give you a flavour of the work that's been achieved to date, and also the future kind of goals for the project around what we hopefully want to achieve around really having a real impact around building mindfulness-based practice to support adults with learning disability and a broad range of adults with lots of different needs across North Wales. And for me, that's why I kind of discuss learning disabilities in the sense of learning disabilities, because a lot of the adults supported by services have a lot and a broad range of complex needs. So it's about kind of meeting needs in a person-centred and flexible relationship-based approach. So kind of just at the start of this presentation, really, just giving you that pause for thought and that reflection around, you know, how do you see mindfulness fitting in with learning disability services? When can we use mindfulness to support adults with learning disabilities, and what are the possibilities here? Because even though I've seen mindfulness, in particular North Wales, really kind of embedded across primary schools, secondary schools, and across services like the mental health services, for me, kind of working in the learning disability services, I felt there was quite a lot of momentum and development that the people that we were working with and supporting could really benefit from. And I mentioned at the start of this presentation that one of my real passions, and probably one of the things that I'm most proud of from my career, is around building the wellbeing service, which was a preventative services for adults with learning disabilities in Gwynedd, in North Wales. And the whole aim of that project really was to look at that community focused and that kind of approach to well-being that included that holistic approach to your mind, your body, and your everyday life and everyday living. So for me, I very much saw mindfulness there. That's what mindfulness meant for me. It could be something potentially that could support adults with a learning disability on an everyday basis. So the ethos of the project was around having a social prescription approach. So as I mentioned, that very much well-being approach, that Welsh approach for me, which is embedded within our social policy framework in Wales. It's around really looking at what matters to the people we're supporting across adult social care, and really looking at well-being in that holistic, strength-based way. So for me, I wanted to work across services across North Wales to look at building tailored approaches to mindfulness that could be person-centered, but had to be flexible, had to be kind of adapted. So it couldn't be rigid. It needed to be something that really looked at a broad range of needs. And some of the groups of adults that I've supported to date have had a significant broad range of needs. And around working with these groups of individuals, it's based on that relationship. It's based on that sense of community, those conversations, and looking at getting to know what works for individuals within those groups, and offering one-to-one sessions as well, if that kind of meets the needs of that individual in a more tailored way. So the project aims to kind of break down North Wales, which has 7 local authority areas. It was felt that it would be better to really focus the pilot in key sites of the region. Because, for example, Gwynedd has 600 adults on the learning disability register, just over 600 adults. So you're looking at kind of quite a large population of people to support. So to kind of begin to build the momentum across services in North Wales around mindfulness, the aim was to look at 2 key pilot sites, and those initial pilot sites were Gwynedd and Conway. And the aim was to really look at building awareness sessions. So really delivering kind of those awareness sessions, which I did during COVID and post-COVID. So most of those sessions were delivered online. And it was raising awareness around mindfulness, kind of some tools around mindfulness practices and how we can use them to support the people within the services with learning disabilities to begin to kind of really connect with what they were sensing and feeling in their mind and in their body. And kind of making that connection here for me with other kind of projects within learning disability services. So, for example, the idea of positive behaviour support and those kind of well-being and care and support plans. It was about really looking at this as I mentioned, as a social prescription, which could be part of that outcome plan for some of the adults that we were supporting. And then looking at kind of building it as an everyday tool that could link in to kind of really supporting people to be more responsive rather than reactive, and to begin to make that connection around what they were sensing in their mind and in their body. So the starting point of the project was the awareness raising course, and then developing an 8-week specialist mindfulness and learning disability course for a broad range of stakeholders within the learning disability specialist area across North Wales. And to date, I've run 10 8-week courses. The majority of the courses have been online because they've been, again, during COVID and post-COVID, but now I'm beginning to do sessions face-to-face. And the course is not rigid. Whilst it is an 8-week course, it's been adapted to different groups depending on the citizens who are attending the groups, but they have included family members, carers, adults with learning disabilities. It's included support staff from providers, third sector. It's included social workers and also nurses. So a broad range of stakeholders, practitioners, family members and people accessing services. And I've also done very detailed work with some of the key kind of social enterprise providers in North Wales. So the one that I mentioned there, I've been doing very detailed work around developing the toolkit and the app, is a lot of the work I've done in partnership with teahcer, which is a social enterprise supporting adults with a learning disability in Gwynedd. So for me, it was very much important to kind of ground all of these project aims through the voices and experience of practitioners, stakeholders, but also the families and the people accessing services. And all the outputs from this project have been co-produced in partnership with all of those stakeholders. So to bring that kind of authentic voice to what I'm producing, it's having feedback, it's checking in with people, it's trying and a bit of trial and error in partnership with all the services to look at kind of what will work and how things may need to be adapted. So again, being flexible, bespoke and person-centred. And the aim then, so the so what and the impact here was around developing a toolkit that could be used by a broad range of people, whether or not that was support staff, family members, people accessing services, to meet their needs or to meet the needs of the people that they were supporting. And then the ultimate goal now is to launch the app, which I'll hopefully show in a moment, that is going to be available bilingually, so through the medium of Welsh and English, and it will be a freely available app with different tools, different practices, tailored for, in particular, for young people and adults with learning disability, their family member and professional stakeholders. Because for me, what was really important was about building this evidence base and these tools to support adults with a learning disability that could be adapted. I'm very much a mindfulness teacher that feels that mindfulness should be what the person needs it to be, and people should be listening to how they're feeling and sensing, and it should be adapted. That's where I come from the work I've done within this area. And when we're looking here at this picture here from the Learning Disability Practice Journal, this is very much that stereotypical view of kind of this is what mindfulness is. And I don't think those images are helpful in a way, because that's for me is not what mindfulness is. It's very much kind of building this approach now, which has been very much hidden and kind of not really maximised within this area of work, and building that kind of sense of support that is, as I mentioned, person-centred, bespoke, and building on some of the limited research that's available, but building on some of those kind of positive findings. That there's no findings to say at the moment from research that we shouldn't be using mindfulness to support people with learning disabilities. So kind of really supporting that. And supporting that when and if needed through the multidisciplinary team around those individuals. And I've most certainly, as I've mentioned, done individual work, done group work, and building this around choice, individual orientation, and also being mindful of people's language, people's sensory needs, and people's emotional and physical needs as well. And linking it in to kind of support people with very short practices or longer practices, depending on needs, and also maybe building some tools in their own toolkits to sometimes cope with stress and anxiety, and cope with very reactive behaviour. So that's also been a key aim here. And as I mentioned, a kind of lots of the key kind of tenets of the work is very much around that very simple everyday mindfulness, around being present, kind of moving away from that autopilot approach, but also kind of really giving people that kindness and curiosity around being okay with sensing what's there for them, and that's okay, you know, but also using the breath as that anchor, and building that very sensory approach, which is what I've tried to kind of achieve through the toolkit. And as I've said, building that everyday mindfulness in a very flexible way. And around quite a lot of the tools that I've used, it's very, very visual, and it will be adapted so that everything is completely visual, so that it's inclusive depending on people's needs. So this is, for example, my check-in photos. So one of the key things that I found through running these groups now is that people want to check in with what they're feeling in the mind and in the body. And the way that I kind of introduce these pictures is there's that kind of different stories around the pictures, around how you're feeling, but very much around there's no right or wrong way around how you're feeling in the mind or in the body. So it's building that kind of sense of tuning into what you're noticing. But also what I found as well is building that environment and space where people want that. This is my experience. People want that kind space to be able to share how they're feeling in the mind and in the body, and to maybe raise some questions about that without any stigma, judgment, or shame. So a lot of what I've found throughout all the groups that I've run over the last few years is that more than anything, people want that space just to kind of be themselves and to sense what they're feeling, again, as I've said, within that kind space. And then a lot of the toolkit is around very simple kind of breathing exercises, using the hand quite a lot. So a lot of the exercises really making that connection between what you're sensing in the body and also the breath. So the finger breathing exercises, also the lift breathing with the hand going up and the hand going down. And one exercise that I found that individuals really like is the chest and belly breathing. So a lot of the individuals with learning disabilities that I support within group or within a one-to-one basis, that connection with the hand on the chest and the hand on the belly, and that connection around that sensory physical movement of the breath coming in and the breath coming out, is one of the most kind of favoured kind of practices or techniques. And one young woman who I've been supported, one of her kind of physical responses when she gets really worried or anxious is to begin to bring that in her body through the physical movements of hand movements. And that is kind of really the way that she's doing the hand movements is really getting faster and faster as the anxiety is building. So one of the things that I've done with her on a one-to-one basis is really kind of beginning to get into the routine rather than building that hand movement, which is really causing tension and stress through the arms and through the body, is to begin to kind of go through the practice repeatedly and with patience and kindness around reconnecting with the chest and belly breathing, so that is that connection rather than that physical kind of movement with the hands and the arms. So I'm just now going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm hopefully going to be able to show you briefly the app that I've developed. So I just hope that this works now. Sorry, this is the okay. So I'm just going to check now that you. Oh, sorry, Bach. Oh, can you see that? Is that okay?
I can see that.
Yeah. Yep. Cool, brilliant. Okay, so this is the app page, and the app developers just told me to just explain. This is the app on view on a computer. So obviously this is very different, and the view is very different on the phone and on the iPad. So the intention, the app is called Chilltastic, and that was the name that was given by the group that I support in Antir Ryan Fawr. And to be honest with you, I was like, couldn't come up with a brilliant name, and I just love it because it's what they wanted the name to be. And I just think it sounds brilliant, and I can't take any credit for it because it wasn't my idea. So the app contains the toolkit, so a physical copy of the toolkit, and then lots of different techniques around just sensory or mindfulness based practice. Then all the practices, hopefully this will come up, bear with me. All the practices then, it's just taking at here, so you can start the practice. So then it takes you to the practice, which are all will be free practice, and these will all be different, like a library of practices, if you like. And then this is the practice. So this is kind of like a cartoon of me practicing with my dog. And then obviously they've got the volume, and they can practice with this individual. And a lot of the adults that I've been supporting, They'll use the app, within their own time before they go to sleep, or when they're doing an activity, and they're using it quite a lot in the day opportunity services. So those are the kind of practices. And then hopefully what we're going to be doing when we're launching the app is we're going to be kind of offering a space where it's going to be available for free for everyone. We're not going to be gathering any personal information. There's not going to be any login. What we are going to be tracking is which practices from the library are most used, which are the most popular, and what time of day people are using it, so that we can kind of develop and kind of continue to kind of improve the app as we're building it over the next year. So just to kind of wrap up and finalise, the next steps now, this project will now continue until at least March 2025, so it's been extended, which is really good news. And the aim now is to launch the app in January and to do further groups with citizens across the learning disability community in North Wales. So really excited about that. And to continue to embed the ethos that, people with learning disabilities do enjoy mindfulness, can be part of the mindfulness community, and should not be excluded. So it's building that more inclusive space and to begin to measure the impact and the outcomes. So those are the next steps now over the next year, and really kind of begin to get the impact from the use, hopefully, of the app, and how that kind of hopefully supports the well-being of the people of North Wales. And it will also be available beyond North Wales. And as I mentioned, it will be a free resource. So I will stop there now, otherwise I'll be talking about this project and everyone will still be here about 10 o'clock, because I don't know if you've mentioned, but I can talk for Wales. So thank you very much for the space to discuss my really passionate project. Happy to take questions later on when that's ready. So diolch yn fawr iawn pawb. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Fishpani.
Okay, rookie error there. Yes, so first of all, thank you so much to Ceryl. That was really fascinating, and it really, I think we're just getting the fruits of so many years of work and creativity and innovation and care. Care for the people in the service that you're involved in. So thank you so much, and I think that really applies to both Richard and Ceryl, and it's quite a lot to take in, isn't it? And I don't know about everyone else on the call. I've had some experience working with some of the people that Richard works with in prisons mainly, not so much with Ceryl. And I imagine it's the same for all of us. These are quite specific areas of work, and you've had to delve quite deep. Ceryl, I'm imagining you might want to have a moment, just gather yourself and take a deep breath. But I am interested, before we open things up, just to hear your responses to each other's projects. And, maybe we could start with Richard, if there was anything that Ceryl said that stimulated you, that seems similar or different or anything like that.
Yes, definitely. I think that looking at a sensory approach as a gateway to bringing somebody into the moment. I mean, that's something that we all do in our practice, but actually looking at that as a focus, particularly for people who are finding the whole concept of mindfulness quite challenging, bringing that back to the senses in a simple, non-threatening, non-look at me way is really important, I think. So I certainly took that from what Ceryl was saying in terms of those gateways in. and those doorways, I suppose, into that space. I think that's really important. Yeah, and also we shared this idea of agility, and actually looking at what bringing mindfulness from the people that you're working with, not to the people that you're working with. So not turning up with a fixed syllabus that says, this is the way this has to work for you, we're now going to teach you something. This is almost about uncovering something in somebody else and getting them to find something that is innately within them and find a way to access that. And therefore that can be more trauma informed. It's not as threatening. It's actually can keep somebody in their comfort zone. And I think, from a very sort of working with people with real trauma, it was quite interesting. And I suppose some of the differences is that, I can't, for me, it's very much about what's in the room. What the work that I do with these individuals that I'm working with isn't going to work over Zoom. It's not going to work in an app in the same way, but I can see how Carol's work does, because it's not quite so inflammatory, perhaps, in terms of those areas. But it's interesting to see how those two can dovetail together quite effectively. I think I've got a lot to learn from what Carol's got, and I'm certainly going to be looking at it a lot closer in terms of moving forward with my work. So I'm going to be in touch, Carol.
I think that's why we're doing this, isn't it? That there is a field of mindfulness in education and mindfulness in healthcare, and those are quite well developed, and not so much mindfulness in what, let's just use the blanket term, social work. If that's the right word, I never quite know what to use. I think that's an area that you're both pioneering. And Carol, I just wondered if you had any thoughts coming out of listening to Richard. I know you've just been in your own material, but anything that struck you?
Yeah, I think when I was kind of listening and absorbing Richard's presentation, what was lovely was I agreed with everything that Richard was discussing, and particular around, I made some notes here, around that agility. For me, you have to be flexible. And you have to be personable and down to earth. I know that sounds, but you have to be someone that can kind of build that relationship with individuals. And I don't know how many times I've gone in to do the group session, and then I'm kind of shifting completely what I'd intended to do and doing something different, and that's okay. So it's really being very, very flexible, person-centered, and kind of observing and getting to know people. And I guess that's why I did parts of the pilot within one area that I knew very well. And I knew some of the citizens very well. So it's very relationship-based for me. But kind of absorbing what Richard was saying, it's that trauma-informed approach. It's kind of being very sensitive to people's needs, people's experiences, and adapting to that. And kind of building that idea around that flexibility that Richard was talking about within his space, but also adapting that depending on the conversation, and really also being there in the here and now, kind of not waiting, grabbing that opportunity when people were coming to your sessions, kind of really gathering that and making the most of that, because that opportunity will pass. And I would agree with that. It's kind of having those conversations, offering those practices when they're needed, as you can provide that in a fluid way. So I think for me, Richard's presentation really resonated with looking at kind of that broad range of complexity of experiences, needs, and the impact of trauma across our society, and being more inclusive within our approaches to mindfulness.
Can I come in here for a second?
Yes. Now, who is speaking?
It's teahcer, or is there?
Could you? All right. Would it be possible to? Oh no, we can't see you.
No, but can you hear me?
Okay. All right. So I have a question. When people want to come in, it's great that you want to do that, Derek. about spotlighting people, but that actually doesn't really arise if your camera isn't working.
Okay.
So, yes, please ask your question.
Well, it's just an observation really, and in the fact that what I've learned tonight has reinforced my belief in all of this stuff. I've practiced social work for over 40 years and worked with the most vulnerable people in society, including people on the streets and including those with complex mental health needs. And then decided about 3 or 4 years ago, because I'd been interested in mindfulness myself, having experienced breast cancer and wanting a tool to sort of help me through, and trained as a mindfulness practitioner. But like a lot of people, then I semi-retired, and then we had COVID. So, you know, my practice, my personal practice was set back a bit. But in the interim, I've just set up with my consultant a new charity called Angor in Welsh. I'r rhai sydd yn siarad Cymraeg, Angor yw enw'r elusen. That's Anchor in English. And it's for all those people who are living with limiting life illnesses. So it's not necessarily a life-threatening diagnosis. It's for people who are living with a diagnosis that limits them in different ways. And that could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be all sorts of things. And we are in the process of trying to do something sort of similar to Ceryl and to Richard, in terms of working out how best to offer mindfulness to the people that turn up at our sort of pop-ups throughout the communities in Carmarthenshire. So I've been really encouraged this evening, because I've learned a lot from the different approaches. And the last thing I want to say is, because we've mentioned things like strength-based and inclusivity, having worked as a community development officer as well in one of the most deprived communities across Wales, asset-based community development approaches are exactly that. I mean, we are really learning from the people that we are practicing mindfulness with, because of their lived experience, they are the experts in their own lives, really. And I think that's the starting point for any sort of long-term sustainable practice. So it's been really encouraging for me to be here this evening. Just wanted to thank you for that, really. Great. Good work, both of you.
Lovely. Thank you, Derek.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, diolch.
Okay. Derek, please do put in the chat the details of your work, so that we could share that later and find out about what it is you're doing, if there's a website or something like that. I have a question for both of you, which is about, it actually follows, I think, from what you were saying, Carol, about the qualities that you personally bring to this work of agility, sensitivity, flexibility. And it seems to me that implies two things. Firstly, that you know your clients, and as an experienced person working in the field, you will do that. But also that you've got a certain level of experience with mindfulness, that you're able to do more than just deliver a set curriculum. You're able to adapt it. So that what the question that raises for me, and interesting what you both think about that, is how do we spread this further when actually there's quite a high level of skill involved in working with these difficult groups of people?
I think, sorry, I've jumped in, Carol.
It's okay.
I think it comes down to recognizing both of those qualities, as you said, Vishwapani, that it isn't something that you can helicopter in and deliver. It does take a knowledge and an understanding and an empathy, if that's the right word, with the people that you're working with. And so I suppose it does call for you know, identifying individuals who are in that area of work, and so looking at the area of well-being, looking at that area of social work, looking at that area of services that meet people where they are, that aren't sort of putting conditions and saying, you know, you need to be this in order to access this, you know, of services that are taking that open-hearted, non-judgmental approach to working with individuals, and then finding the people with the experience within that, and actually, you know, looking at developing their mindfulness skills to start with. So I think some of the work that's been done around, you know, champions courses and developing that, and getting people into that, so that it can actually, it may take years to go through that process, but it's so rewarding when it happens, because it comes in at so many different levels. And I think that, you know, looking at profession-based mindfulness is really important, I think. And whilst generic teaching is great and it's fine, when you're working with specific client groups from specific interest communities, that it does take a slightly different angle. I don't know if you agree with that, Carol.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I agree with that. It needs to be kind of profession-based. And you know, for me, a couple of things really. I've been surprised that it's not something that's embedded more in social work, because when you're looking at social work as a profession with its value-based, very much value-based, person-centered profession, probably one of the most professions focused on looking at people's social problems and people's everyday lives and understanding the issues that people face. I'm very surprised that it hasn't embedded more within social work. So I think it should do. And I think we should be brave and move forward and really look at how we can adapt mindfulness-based approaches to different groups of individuals accessing broad range of services to support sometimes very complex needs. And I think kind of also giving ourselves permission not to be too rigid, to kind of give it a go, but also to be adapted, as we've been saying. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of the groups that I've been supporting, people just want, quite a lot of the time, people want that kind space, and just a space where they can practice, they can feel listened to when they're discussing what they notice during that practice. And I always do kind of a check-in with everyone at the start and at the finish. And I think it's kind of being brave and being more inclusive in our approaches to mindfulness. And as I've said, kind of, planning ahead, getting to know the citizens you're supporting.
What does that mean? Sorry, Carol, just inclusive. What does that word mean for you?
Well, for me, I think there was this sense that people with a learning disability could not practice mindfulness because of changes to their cognition, for example. Well, my approach to that then, well, how about we get to know the individual and understand the needs of the individual and have a look at how we can adapt, how we can be flexible, how we communicate. I think sometimes, if I'm being honest, people sometimes are worried and concerned about communicating with people with different needs. And I think sometimes it's just about being human and being every day and looking at how do you talk to individuals, and how do you talk to individuals with different needs. And I think there's a bit of fear there. That's my view. I'm not saying I'm right, but it's the same sometimes, you know, the same analogy sometimes where people say, well, I don't know how to talk to that child or young person, or I don't know how to talk to this person who's had this kind of experience. And I think sometimes if you're being sensitive and you're being quite person-centered, it is about relationships and communication.
Brilliant.
I agree with that. Sorry. I think that's really important in terms of that sensitivity. But I think it's also about, from that inclusivity also comes from the person leading or teaching or practicing the mindfulness with a group as well, because you've got to be able to turn towards your own feelings with that as well. And you know, inclusivity, when you look at traditional counselling models, counsellors won't work with somebody who's under the influence. So, from our perspective, if you've got somebody who's under the influence for 95% of the day, does that mean, you can't ever work with them? So inclusivity can be quite complicated, but also working with people and talking to them about you are not your thoughts, you are not your actions is all very well. But when you're working with a Schedule 1 sex offender, lots of people are going to feel really, really uncomfortable about going into that space. And therefore being able to go into that space in a non-judgmental way is really, really important. But you do have to acknowledge your own fears, because you might be sitting in a room with somebody who's a convicted murderer, as well as a convicted sex offender or whatever. And therefore you've got to be able to bring an open heart to that yourself. And if you can't do that, it's not going to work. So that's inclusivity on both sides. It's not just about...
It's a radical thing, isn't it? I'd like to bring in Tereshwari now, who's put your hand up, and I did check this out with Tereshwari before. So I'll just say, Tereshwari is a friend of mine, and who's based in London. We've worked together a bit. Tereshwari runs something called Take Back Your Life, which is, and I think the connection is really going into the community. Take Back Your Life is mental health support. Anyway, Tereshwari, you can say a little bit about that and ask a question if you like, or make a comment.
I work on a project called Take Back Your Life, and we work with people from disadvantaged communities in East London. It ends up being a lot of women, people with chronic pain and illness. And I've adapted Vijamala Birch's Mindfulness for Health so that it's more accessible to people with English as a second language, and also unpaid carers who have a lot of suicidal ideation, that sort of thing. And I resonate with, I'm so sorry, Richard, I didn't hear your presentation because I had to go to a meeting earlier, so I'm hoping to catch it on the recording. But for what both of you have said since I've been here, I really resonate with everything you've been saying. I mean, I was just thinking of an example of when we ran an online course, and there were 2 teachers and a supporter, and we ended up having to divide the group into 3 because one, some people just can't focus on the breath because of trauma. And so having to really be creative and sensitive. And I mean, we had one woman who was Chinese who happened to know a bit about chanting, so we ended up chanting with her. I was with her chanting, and then we had some people who could do the ordinary thing, and then we had some people doing finger tracing. So I think everything you've said resonates, and your app looks amazing, and I would love to know about slime meditation. That sounds, we also do, I have a whole bag of tricks. So I have a bag of things, and people can choose a stress ball or a stretchy man, or and I think, there's something just about kindness, just about kindness and sensitivity. And I was just thinking, I think one more point, when you were saying about who can run these programs, but actually I did a Mindfulness Champions project with Vishwapani, and I think Vishwapani, maybe at the beginning you were a little bit nervous and you were thinking, you're used to that community, you can relate to these people, but certainly by the end, you really built relationships and rapport with people, and people really appreciated you. So I think from my experience, it takes kindness and sensitivity and possibly understanding of the particular group, but I think that can be learned if someone's open to doing that. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah. That wasn't my take on our relationship, Tereshwari. I don't know, it's the other way around. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. But the champions thing was interesting because it was getting the service users to lead meditations themselves in the various groups that they were working with. That's what the champions is. Okay, so that's really interesting. I'd just like to bring in Elenid Gold here. It's all right if I spotlight you, Elenid? Okay. And Elenid, I know you from when you taught me on the TTR1 many years ago. But yeah, it's lovely to see you.
Yeah, lovely to see you and a few familiar faces on the screen. It's very tempting not to make it into a social, actually, but hello to everybody. I'm just, first of all, I'm really struck by the skill and open-heartedness just in this group that we have on screen here. I mean, it's enormous within the mindfulness community. So some of those of you that know me will know that I've been involved in training mindfulness teachers for a long time. So what I was struck by really was this does speak to how we train mindfulness teachers and give them permission to break out from the curriculum and to bring the existing skills that they already have. And there's an enormous wealth here. And I was just thinking how wonderful it would be if some few people who have this wealth of experience with particular communities would also be supervisors of newer mindfulness teachers, so that you can combine these two skills, exactly as Vishwapani, you mentioned, Richard, you were also saying, we need the mindfulness skills. It's really important that you have your own practice and you're able to bring that, because if you haven't struggled with it yourself, how on earth would you know what people, the difficulties they have and what they need to be helped with? But also the breadth of experience with so many diverse communities. My background is I worked with parents for a long time, and I taught a group of parents in Blaenau Ffestiniog, and I tried to teach them an 8-week MBSR course, and it fell absolutely flat. I think I lost 3/4 of the group. But I learned enormously from that, and then worked with the people who were based at health visitors and people who were based in Blaenau, and we developed a course that was it was an 8-week course, but it was very, very much adapted. So I think there is this possibility to bring these things together, but we do need to, I think, change. I think it's already changing the way that we train people so that they don't feel bound by the 8-week curriculum, which has served enormously well and continues to serve. But then there's a whole wealth of people out there who can't access that. So we need people like you guys to bring the skills together. So if any of you fancy offering your skills as supervisors, that would be really helpful. So thank you, everybody, for the work that you do.
Okay. Just looking at the clock, which is my job, I think I'm going to just come back to Richard and Carol specifically. And well, it's a chance for any reflections on what you've heard. But I have an agenda which is about developing mindfulness in this field. Like I said, that in healthcare and in education, mindfulness is really well recognized and established, but not in social work. And I agree with what Carol said, that there's no reason for that. There may be attitudes and so on, but there's no good reason for it. And in some ways, it's quite surprising given the profile of people who go into social work. A couple of times we've mentioned the Mindfulness Champions thing that I run, which is a 10-hour training for people like social workers to be able to integrate mindfulness into their work. So yeah, I'm just interested in your final reflections on those sorts of issues, the ones that Tereshri and Elenid have raised, and that question about where do we take this? How can we move this forward? And Richard, by the way, is, I think, a secret weapon, as you're now the director of the Mindfulness Initiative. But is it something that the Mindfulness Initiative could look at? Not putting you on the spot or anything.
I'm conscious that Carol turned her mic off before
okay.
I did, so I wondered if
All
Carol
right, so
wanted
maybe
to come
Carol
first.
Yeah, okay.
I think for me, I think there is the opportunity now to begin to embed this more within social work practice. I think when you look at the profile of the workers, the value base is there. That compassion, that understanding of people's needs is there. Looking at strengths, looking at holistically people, and looking at people. We're all people at the end of the day, and being more inclusive and you know, changing that world which is very much focused on social exclusion. So one of the aims that I would quite like to do through the project that I'm leading on is to really begin to change that culture in North Wales, in particular within the learning disability service, and then possibly within other services. But I most certainly would like to see this become more and more a social prescription, which I'm very much kind of really promoting, because I think it's those well-being and preventative approaches should be more of the way forward. And when we're looking at people's needs and assessing people's needs, which is what social work is about, and we're looking then at what matters to those people and that care and support plan, then why can't we offer a mindfulness as a form of intervention, as a form of support, whether or not that's very much tailored to that individual need or whether or not it's one-off? Why can't we have those mindfulness cafes or mindfulness spaces where people are just coming to check in with themselves and being part of that group, where they don't feel maybe that judgment, stigma and shame? So
Brilliant. Carol,
yeah,
I'm going to
I
have
think we
to
can
stop
do.
you there because
Yeah.
just watching the clock. So to give Richard just a chance to respond briefly.
Yeah, I've never been described as a secret weapon before. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that.
Maybe you're not. Maybe it's not secret. Maybe
No, I don't think it is. I think you just blown my cover, Vishwapani. But yes, I think, you know, the work has to go on the ground, and the work is going on the ground, and it's how we actually spread that. And I think events like this and actually talking about this and sharing this information is really, really important to get people to realize that this isn't something that can't happen. This is something that can happen and can make a difference. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, but that doesn't mean to say that it can't happen. But I think, you know, in terms of social work, in terms of, you know, all the different areas of that, whether that's working in the criminal justice system, working in prisons, working in probation, working in social work, working in learning disabilities, working in physical disabilities, working in all of those different areas of social work, I think, you know, the secret weapon in terms of the mindfulness initiative is that policy agenda. Is actually, it's not just about getting people at the top to say, yeah, okay, we think MBCT is okay, so we're going to put MBCT in there, because then that ties people to MBCT and 8-week courses and all of that. It's actually opening that up and saying, actually, there's more to this than that. Yes, there is an evidence base here. Yes, this is a really valid platform. Yes, but actually, elements of this can be taken out and used skillfully in order to meet specific needs within specific communities at specific times, and actually creating a policy landscape within commissioners, within the criminal justice system, within social service departments, within public service boards in Wales. All of those things can actually create a landscape where these things can be taken seriously, and therefore people who are trying to do something on the ground can be supported by line management and the structures in which they're working. And without that support within the structures, you know, people aren't working on fertile ground, and they do some work and it'll be, yeah, okay, you can turn up and deliver this, like turning up and delivering a session in the Irish Parliament. Unless there's actually a framework to support that, it withers and dies quite quickly. So you need to have that policy framework coming down. So I'll stop talking now. Thank you for
Good. Well, thank you. That's perfect. We're just going slightly over time, but that's it's a big area to explore. I'd like to make a request to anyone who's on the call now, or who's watching this as a recording, that if you're particularly in Wales and social work is your area and you'd like to continue this conversation, that you just send an email to Mindfulness Wales and we will do something with it. Don't know what, but we will register that. And I think that's one of the things we want to do as an organisation in Mindfulness Wales, which is to create these networks. And social work is an area where there isn't one yet. We need that. So to support us in that, we're currently doing a scoping exercise. We're proposing a scoping exercise of all the mindfulness things that are going on in Wales. We're looking for funding for that, but we need some help financially to make that possible. As with all of our work, your donations are gratefully received. And there's a button on the mindfulnesswales.org website where you can make a donation if you'd like to. We really appreciate that. There's no charge for these sessions, but we're ambitious about what we would like to do. So it only remains for me to thank Ceryl and Richard, first of all, for your work, actually, which I think is the real thanks that you pioneered these areas and you're continuing to do so. And secondly, for your contribution tonight. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you so much. Okay, so we will finish there. Those of you who are, Ceryl and Richard, if you want to just stay on the call, we can just debrief a bit. But for everyone else, apart from the trustees, thank you so much for joining us. And yes, as Kate says, very inspiring.